are watching the world 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. The Pakistan Army has said that all 33 Baloch militants which hijacked a passenger train carrying over 400 passengers in Pakistan's restive Balochistan province were killed. Passengers on board the Jafar Express have spoken of what they call doomsday scenes. Donald Trump has suggested he could target Russia financially as Ukraine's president urged him to take strong steps if Moscow failed to support a 30-day ceasefire agreed in a meeting between Ukrainian and US delegations in Saudi Arabia. The Kremlin has just said it would review details from Washington. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has joined the investigation for a 20-year-old Indian origin student, Sudiksha Konanki, who disappeared a week ago. Meanwhile, she can be seen wobbling while strolling arm in arm with an Iowa man in a new surveillance video. NASA says the launch of the NASA SpaceX Crew 10 mission, which aims to bring back stranded astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore from the International Space Station, has been postponed. A day after Airtel and Jio announced that they have partnered with SpaceX to offer Starlink satellite service in India, IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav welcomes the move in a tweet. He says Starlink welcome to India, but the IT Minister for some reason deletes that tweet. India and Mauritius have elevated ties to an enhanced strategic partnership and inked 8 pacts to boost cooperation in several sectors, including trade and maritime security. Our big focus remains the neighborhood, Pakistan to be specific, where security forces killed all 33 militants who had been holding a train and its passengers captive since Tuesday, putting an end to an embarrassing security failure for Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. The government also said 21 of the hostages had been killed by the militants, 4 members of the military were killed, and 17 hostages were injured in the gun battle, and the remaining passengers, which are about more than 400 people, have now been freed. This is what the army spokesman has said in a video released by his office. In fact, for further details, we have with us Ahmad Mustakhan, senior journalist from Balochistan, joining us on NDTV. Thank you so much for joining us with the latest. We're picking up from reports that some hostages were also killed as per authorities, though the exact death toll remains unclear at this point. Do we have any further clarity on that? And also take us through the latest developments.
Yes, ma'am. See, truth is the first casualty in any war. And as far as our military friends in Pakistan go, you are very well aware of how truthful and honest they are. I mean, this is a military that refused to take back its own bodies in Kargil, if you remember. No military in the world does that kind of cowardice, to leave their own soldiers in the country that they try to illegally for a part of that. So when it comes to Pakistan military, I will please say, if the Pakistan military says it is night, believe it is day. So because they are so untruthful. I will give you one example. Have they ever said they have Dawood Ibrahim, whose hands are red with the blood of so many innocent Indians who they are hosting like a VIP dignitary in their country? Have they ever said he's in their country? This is one example. Right. There are so many other examples. They were hiding bin Laden next door to their own military academy.
But in terms of the latest developments and pertaining to what has just happened, 400 passengers were held hostage. They were held captive since Tuesday. We are aware that militants from separatist groups like BLA have actually been attacking security forces in mineral-rich Balochistan for decades. But as far as the frequency is concerned, hasn't it increased in the past few years?
See, this will get even, I would say, even better. I will salute the Baluch who gave their lives for the motherland. It's been terrible. There has to be a limit. We Baloch are on our own land. The Pakistani military boot do not belong to Balochistan. The Pakistani Punjabi military, the Potohar generals, must understand where the borders of Punjab end and where Balochistan begins. We, by nature, Mother Nature has given us the right to defend our motherland, our resources, our honor, our lives. Every day, ma'am, every day, not a single day passes by when their intelligence, military intelligence, the ISI, comes into our houses, our homes. They take away our youngsters. This has been happening for 18, 20 years now.
Of course, this attack was absolutely
this is not
shocking,
a terrorist action.
And we do know that it comes as Pakistan's government tries to rebuild an anemic economy and also lure investment while struggling to control violence from militants, as you have seen since the developments from the neighborhood since Tuesday. Emar Mustakhan, thank you so much for joining us with the latest from Balochistan, Pakistan. Well, switching tracks, the Kremlin has just said it would review details from Washington about a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine before responding, while US Secretary of State Marco Rubio hoped a deal would be struck just within days. But as Moscow considers this plan, Vladimir Putin actually made a surprise visit to Russia's Kursk region for the first time since Ukrainian troops captured part of it last year. Ukrainian President Zelensky, meanwhile, has said that Ukraine will not recognize any captured Russian territory, as he added that he was ready to sign a minerals deal. But don't forget, US President Donald Trump has threatened financial penalties if President Putin does not accept the 30-day ceasefire deal after Kyiv agreed to the plan in Saudi Arabia.
There are things you could do that wouldn't be pleasant in a financial sense. I can do things financially that would be very bad for Russia. I don't want to do that because I want to get peace. I want to see peace, and we'll see. But in a financial sense, yeah, we could do things very bad for Russia. It would be devastating for Russia, but I don't want to do that because I want to see peace.
Meanwhile, I must inform you with what the Ukrainian president is up to. Volodymyr Zelensky has said that if Russia agrees to this US-backed 30-day ceasefire agreement, it would open the door to a step-by-step plan to ending the war. But top diplomats from Ukraine and the US met in Saudi Arabia to discuss an end to hostilities, as we have been covering. As a result of the talks, Washington resumed arms delivery to Kyiv, while Zelensky agreed to a 30-day US-backed ceasefire plan, pending Moscow's approval, as I just mentioned. He described the meeting as the first constructive and detailed dialogue between the two countries since the Trump administration took office. Remember, this is after that horrific experience that he had in the Oval Office with Donald Trump, which was flashed on screens worldwide. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that he hoped a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine could take place within days if Russian leaders agreed, and that he planned to get diplomats from the G7 nations to actually focus on ending the war in a meeting this week in Canada. But just listen in to what Zelensky had to say about the ceasefire plan.
Після такого кроку може бути використана пропозиція, та, яка була вчора на столі перемовин від американської сторони, 30-денний термін, підготувати повністю план щодо закінчення війни. Покроковий план з гарантіями безпеки для української сторони. Якщо все це буде зроблено, то після підготовки цього плану у будь-якому випадку поетапне виконання, яке призведе до закінчення війни. Після закінчення війни буде знятий військовий стан, і після зняття військового стану вибори будуть проходити згідно українському законодавству. Ніхто нічого спеціально відтерміновувати не буде.
Also, as Ukraine has agreed to this 30-day ceasefire with Russia after talks between Ukraine and American leaders in Saudi Arabia, the question is, will Vladimir Putin agree to these terms, and what if he doesn't? Ian Bremmer spoke exclusively to NDTV. Listen in to his viewpoint.
Isn't it bizarre that, we are having this conversation based on what's taken place in Saudi Arabia, and yet issues like territory, which is the central issue here, or security guarantees, which Zelensky rightfully wants, we haven't come around to that at all. It's just a ceasefire with nothing beyond that, an assumption that that might actually happen, a security guarantee. There is no guarantee, right? Russia can restart whatever it chooses to in the future. At the moment, no security guarantee.
Sure, that's right. Very similar to Gaza. Again, there were no hard guarantees for what Palestinian governance was going to look like, but you did manage to get a ceasefire that created some space, in this case, for some of the hostages to be released, for some of the prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, to be released, also for humanitarian aid to get in. You could have easily asked me, but we haven't resolved a two-state solution for the Palestinians. We haven't resolved what governance is going to look like for Gaza. That's right. And here we haven't in any way, even if the ceasefire comes into place, we have not resolved any of the ongoing issues about how Ukraine is going to be ensured that has security as a sovereign state. And let's face it, nobody thinks they're going to get their territory back. Now, that's wrong. It was illegally invaded by the Russians. They have a principle of territorial integrity enshrined in the United Nations Charter that the world has in principle supported for generations now, since 1945, and yet the Americans just a few weeks ago, with a General Assembly resolution, decided that they were going to support a piece of a declaration that no longer called for territorial integrity, just called for ending the war. And territorial integrity is not a part of it, which is why the countries that supported the U.S. were North Korea and Sudan and Syria and Belarus and Russia. Not exactly the exemplars of international leadership on the global stage.
Well, in other developments, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has rejected the idea of negotiations with the United States over its nuclear program, as Tehran confirmed receiving a letter from President Donald Trump. Last week, US President Donald Trump had said the letter proposed talks on a deal that would prevent Iran acquiring nuclear weapons and avert possible military action. Now, although Khamenei said he had not seen the letter, which was delivered by an official from the United Arab Emirates, he dismissed it as a deception of public opinion. Now, I have to give you context here. 10 years ago, the country agreed a historic deal with 6 world powers, China, France, Germany, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, to limit its nuclear activities and allow monitoring by inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency in return for sanctions relief. However, Trump unilaterally pulled the US out of the accord in 2018 and reinstated crippling US economic sanctions. He labeled it the worst deal in history, saying it did too little to stop Iran's potential pathway to building a nuclear bomb. But here's where things stand at the moment.
اینی که رئیس جمهور آمریکا میگه ما آماده هستیم با ایران مذاکره کنیم و دعوت به مذاکره و ادعا میکنه که نامه‌ای فرستاده که البته به ما نرسیده، به من یعنی نرسیده. به نظر من این فریب افکار عمومی دنیاست. این معناش این است که ما اهل مذاکره میخوایم مذاکره کنیم، صلح کنیم، دعوا نباشه، ایران حاضر به مذاکره. همین شخص مذاکره تمام شده، کامل شده، امضا شده رو از میز بیرون انداخت، پاره کرد. با این آدم چجور میشه مذاکره کرد؟
The other big story we're tracking on NDTV, authorities have identified a person of interest in the case of Sudiksha Konanki's disappearance. A 24-year-old man is being questioned following the college student's disappearance during her spring break in the Dominican Republic. In fact, I must also inform you that the Federal Bureau of Investigation has joined the investigation for this Indian origin student who disappeared a week ago. Meanwhile, she can be seen wobbling while strolling arm in arm on the right side of your screens with an Iowa man in a new surveillance video. And in other news, a NASA SpaceX mission that aimed to clear the way for 2 stranded astronauts to get back to Earth has been postponed. The rocket aimed to fly 4 new crew members to the International Space Station and pave the way for the return for Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. That entire mission was postponed last minute. The NASA astronauts left Earth on the 5th of June last year, 2024, basically, for an 8-day mission and have been stuck at the ISS for more than 9 months, instead helping ongoing missions at the station with maintenance and experiments. SpaceX said the issue that forced the launch to scrub related to the hydraulics on one of the clamp arms, which engineers were actually trying to fix. My colleague Pallav Bagla joins us with the latest lowdown. Pallav, we're hearing there's another launch window today and on Friday if SpaceX can fix the problems which they face with the hydraulics of one of the arms?
That is true. There is another window on Thursday, American time, and Friday, American time. So let us see if they can fix the problem with the ground issue of the Falcon 9 rocket. Then there could be a launch. If not, we'll have to wait and watch. But there have been repeated hiccups on the return of astronaut Sunita Williams. And this is the latest in the series of hiccups which have happened on her return. Because if this Falcon 9 rocket with the crew of 4 doesn't go up, then her return would also be affected. As of now, NASA and SpaceX are not saying that her return could be affected, but yes, there has been a hiccup today.
Pallav, thank you so much as always for joining us with the latest developments. Meanwhile, a day after Airtel and Jio announced that they have partnered with SpaceX to offer Starlink satellite services in India, IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav welcomed the move in a tweet. In fact, the minister had written saying Starlink, welcome to India, with great enthusiasm, but the IT minister, for some reason, deleted that tweet after posting it. Meanwhile, India's top telecom firms, Airtel and Jio, have signed deals with Elon Musk's company to offer Starlink services pending government approval, as we have extensively covered. It is important to note that both companies had initially opposed Starlink's entry. But why Starlink? It is a service that has increasingly become popular in many parts of the world. It's an internet service that uses satellite connectivity to beam high-speed broadband to users. Because it doesn't rely on land-based fiber cables, it can reach remote areas as well as offer connectivity even in adverse conditions such as natural disasters and storms. But the entry of Starlink into the Indian market is expected to bridge the digital divide, especially in rural areas. But the big question, will Indian consumers pay the premium price for this broadband service? You must note that SpaceX's president has now urged the Indian government to grant authorization, while Musk had earlier hinted at regulatory hurdles being a challenge. News and updates continue in a moment right after this very short break. Do stay tuned.
AI scientist, and some would even call him a rock star in the AI space.
We definitely need AI for is to unlock some of the mysteries of nature.
As someone who is an AI scientist, what is your goal?
Our civilization is facing a number of sort of challenges, and I think this is where AI comes into the picture.
Will this replace most jobs?
The new generation of AI models is that they have cognitive ability.
In today's interconnected world, India's voice is more crucial than ever. When India speaks, the world listens. At NDTV World, we are that voice, bringing you intelligent and insightful news from India and beyond. From geopolitics and diplomacy to economic shifts, migrations, tech disruptions, and the stories of our diaspora. We cover the news that shapes our global future. NDTV World, your new home for global news, is here.
From interesting tech startups to industry-leading companies, politics, sports, culture, curry, cricket. Oh, there's so much to talk about. Like me, if you too thrive on interesting conversations, this is a show you cannot miss. Watch this space to know more about all matters and all people that make Britain what it is today. Out of Britain with me, Radhika Iyer.
Path-breaking innovation and a lot that technology can achieve. But I feel this is one question that I must ask simply because it impacts so many people's lives, which is the role AI is playing in our lives in terms of some sort of a disinformation, that's also happening, and a large part of company and government's resources goes in addressing some of this. As I said, it may look much lower in the tech ladder in terms of what you're doing, but it impacts people's lives. So how can Google sort of address the flip side to AI, which is some of the disinformation that we see? I mean, it may be an inevitable outcome of what you are doing, but is there a way of reducing its potential pitfalls?
So yeah, absolutely. In fact, we think that this is a very important sort of topic that deserves a lot of thought and care. With generative AI especially, it has the ability to sort of generate text, images, audio and video. That ability is very powerful and very useful in many contexts, but it also comes with the risks, right? If the same power is used for malicious purposes. So to make sure that users, when they are consuming this information, they understand whether this content is naturally generated or is synthetically generated, we came up with this technology called SynthID, which is a sort of watermarking scheme which embeds information in the content itself. And we were one of the pioneers in basically doing this. Google was a complete pioneer in sort of doing this, and not only have we integrated this in our models, but in some cases we have also open sourced it so that other sort of companies and other players in the ecosystem can also sort of employ this and adopt this practice for their own products.
Welcome back. Donald Trump has begun another trade war, announcing 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports into the United States. This actually prompted countermeasures from the European Union and Canada, while Australia, the UK, and other countries held back from announcing retaliatory action. The EU, though, has announced it will impose trade countermeasures on up to 26 billion euros, that's about $22 billion worth of US goods, in retaliation to Donald Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, escalating a global trade war. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, called the 25% US levies on global imports of the metals unjustified trade restrictions after they came into force at 4 a.m. GMT on Wednesday.
Put more tariffs on the EU. Will you respond to their retaliation?
Of course I'm going to respond.
You will retaliate with more tariffs.
The problem is our country didn't respond. Look, the EU was set up in order to take advantage of the United States.
For further clarity, we have with us senior journalist live from California, Spencer Critchley at the moment. Spencer, thanks so much for making time for us as always. Only last month, Washington had warned Europe that it would have to take care of itself, of its own security in the future. Now, many analysts actually asserting that a global trade war is on the cards. Take us through the latest developments and where you see this is heading.
It's heading nowhere good. I mean, it's almost as if the United States has taken itself hostage and is threatening to shoot the hostage unless its former trading partners satisfy its demands. There is virtually nobody from right to left in the United States or across the developed world who thinks that what President Trump is doing makes any kind of sense at all, except for the yes men and yes women who surround him and who will apparently agree to absolutely anything he demands they repeat. Here in the United States, there's a mainstream business channel called CNBC, part of the NBC family of channels. And it typically tilts towards the right because it has a business audience. And one of their senior journalists, I believe it was yesterday, was literally saying President Trump's economic policies are insane. And he repeated it and said, I may lose my job for this. perhaps thinking about President Trump's propensity for enacting revenge on people, using the power of the federal government now to do it. But he repeated it. He says, these policies are insane, and they're causing panic among the business community, as well as among ordinary people who are watching their life savings decline dramatically every day.
And that's coming from someone within the entire dispensation. Interestingly, Spencer, Britain, which is not part of the EU, of course, meanwhile said it would not impose retaliatory measures of its own on the United States. Any word on why you think Keir Starmer has made that move?
Well, I think that it's different for every country, and every country has to balance its own particular situation. Now, I'm far from being an international trade economist, but I think that the impact of sanctions on some of these products like steel, for example, are a little bit lower on the UK than they might be on some other countries. Perhaps also they're thinking that what makes a trade war particularly destructive is this cycle of escalation.
Absolutely.
And we see, as in the clip you just played, that President Trump is enthusiastic about escalating, apparently because he thinks at the level of a schoolyard bully. I'm far from the first to observe this. Yes. He does not seem capable of thinking ahead and thinking strategically. He seems to just decide impulsively and then react impulsively, and everything is about his own personal ego, which is incredibly tender. So one way of looking at this whole terrible situation, including the other terrible situations we're facing as well, for example, the betrayal of our ally Ukraine and the betrayal of our European allies, is that we're all being made to pay for Donald Trump's psychological problems.
Well, Spencer, thank you so much, as always, for joining us with your viewpoint. In fact,
Pleasure.
I must also inform our viewers that if it came to a situation where the EU had to retaliate further, in fact, France's Interior Minister has clearly indicated that digital services or intellectual property could also be included. We'll of course keep a track as far as the tariffs are concerned and whether global trade war is in fact on the radar. But in other news, I must mention, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that talk about the US acquiring Canada will not be a topic of discussion when the G7 nations meet in Canada. Asked about Donald Trump's push for Canada to become the 51st state, Marco Rubio brushed off the notion, suggesting that more serious topics such as ending the Russia-Ukraine war would take priority at the meeting of foreign ministers today. Meanwhile, Intel has new leadership. Lip Bhutan, a semiconductor veteran, will become Intel's CEO because the former CEO, Pat Gelsinger, resigned amid massive layoffs and financial struggles. The stock plunged about 60% under his leadership, wiping out $160 billion in shareholder value, and Intel stock jumped 10% after Tan's hiring announcement. Thank you so much for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest for you as always.
AI scientist, and some would even call him a rock star in the AI space.
We definitely need AI for is to unlock some of the mysteries of nature.
As someone who is an AI scientist, what is your goal?
Our civilization is facing a number of sort of challenges, and I think this is where AI comes into the picture.
Will this replace most jobs?
The new generation of AI models is that they have cognitive ability.
In today's interconnected world, India's voice is more crucial than ever. When India speaks, the world listens. At NDTV World, we are that voice, bringing you intelligent and insightful news from India and beyond. From geopolitics and diplomacy to economic shifts, migrations, tech disruptions, and the stories of our diaspora. We cover the news that shapes our global future.